But anyway, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon for what will be a light-hearted look at some Victorian traditions. People always laugh when I say all my lectures around the world and I start with Jersey, but there was a particular reason for me wanting to go to Jersey, and that was to see the Glass Church by René Lalique, very famous. But for the most part, this will be a rather more secular look at Christmas, focusing on very much on Santa Claus, and coming to realise that many of the traditions that we think are very old are in fact quite recent, and even more alarmingly, come from America. So people often, can't put an exact date on something. We talk, we go from Art Nouveau into Art Deco, and we sort of say it's around the time of the First World War, but we can almost put an exact date on when the Victorian Christmas was officially born, 1843. Two important publications of that year, Charles Dickens with his very distinctive hairstyle, as you can see, sort of ringlets, published A Christmas Carol. And in the same year, Henry Cole published or had commissioned the first Christmas card. It was actually issued by his own company. You can see down the bottom, it says Summerleys. And most importantly, the Christmas card gives you a good idea of how the Victorians thought of Christmas. It was much about gift giving as it was receiving. So we're having a jolly drink up in the middle, they're all raising a glass. But most importantly, to one side, we have alms giving in the form of clothes. St Dorcas was the one associated with gifts of clothes to the poor. And on this side, we have what appears to be a footman, in fact, giving away food to the poor. So Henry Cole was very keen. He was the first director of what is now the V&A, very keen to emphasize this idea of largesse at Christmas. And the origins of Christmas are, in fact, as you know, pagan. The Roman Saturnalia, where it was just basically a good old orgy of drinking and eating. And it doesn't become a children's holiday, really, until the 19th century, well, really to the Victorian era. And that we can largely put down to those two characters up there, Albert and Victoria, who had a very large family, and who very much cemented in the Victorian zeitgeist that Christmas was a family holiday with the emphasis on children. Prior to that, Christmas had largely been simply for adults to enjoy. For our recent traditions, well, television has created many of them, hasn't it? So, of course, I have taken the title Upstairs and Downstairs, not from Downton Abbey, which we see here. Highclere was the official home of Downton Abbey, which is here where I live, Hampshire, near Winchester. And you can see at the bottom, I've got some montages from Upstairs, Downstairs, which you might remember from back, oh gosh, in the 70s, I hope. It was actually conceived by Marsh, Jean Marsh, you see here, as one of the downstairs crew. Mrs. Bridges, obviously, ruled in the kitchen. And it was really Edwardian rather than Victorian, and went really from about 1900 up to just before the Second World War. And I thought you would be amused by a very young Anthony Andrews, who we know best, of course, from Brideshead Revisited. So our concept of Christmas is very much shaped by the literature of the era. This is, of course, pre-internet and pre-television, and it was really through books and novels that popular culture was disseminated. And we have Washington Irving, really, to thank for the Victorian conception of Christmas, though straight away you will have realized that he's American. His most famous novel was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which you remember starred Johnny Depp, and was all about beheading, people being beheaded by a phantom. Well, he came up with this idea of a colonial cousin coming back to England to enjoy a traditional Christmas. Written in 1819, 1920, because it was serialized. His Old Christmas was set at the sort of around the turn of the century, because of course they were already looking back on the Georgian era through rose-tinted spectacles. So you can see that on my front cover here, illustrated by Cecil Alden. You know him better for his illustrations to do with dogs. He was a very famous late 19th century illustrator. You can see here the stagecoach. So this is definitely pre-industrial revolution, pre-urbanization. We're going back to a good old-fashioned country Christmas. So Old Christmas here, illustrated by Cecil Alden, the footman here bringing in the, obviously, the Christmas pudding. But on this side, even more famous illustrated version of Old Christmas by Randolph Caldecott, who's one of the best known illustrators of children's books in the 19th century. So you can see on the front cover there, we're all getting together for a dance. And at the bottom here, it's drinking and having fun in the inn. And most importantly, the illustration from the Caldecott Old Christmas has the big feast on Christmas Day. But please note, at this stage, it's still very much about grown-ups and not children. So Randolph Caldecott's Mr. Carleon's Christmas at Marley Hall was serialised in The Graphic in 1881, again giving you this nostalgia for ye oldie worldy Christmas, or ye old English Christmas, again back into the late 18th, early 19th century with the stagecoach. Again, rather like the Washington Irving scenario, our hero has been invited to Marley Hall in the countryside for a traditional Christmas. He starts off, of course, in his carriage and is attacked on the way by some highwaymen. I rather like that down the bottom here. Yeah, not so always good in the old times. And as you can see, top of the next page, overthrew the highwaymen, captured them, and dragged them before a neighbouring justice of the peace. Okay, that's a good way to start your festivities. When he arrives at Marley Hall, you can see they're all round the table drinking, and we're getting into the whole sort of idea of conviviality. But the ghosts, and there's always been a tradition about Christmas and ghosts. Perhaps it's the Christmas carol thing, or perhaps it's just this idea of our visitors, you know, our relatives coming back to haunt us. But down the bottom, we've got one of the party wandering the corridors at night, looking at the portraits, which Mr. Carleon thinks is a ghost. So enter the most famous Christmas ghosts, Dickens' Christmas Carol, published in 1843, so the same year as Henry Cole's Christmas Card. Ebenezer Scrooge, of course, is the central character, and he is mean, and he does not give his long-suffering assistant Bob Cratchit any sort of gift or extra help at Christmas at all. And so Jacob Marley, the ghost of Christmas past, comes to haunt him, and we have past, present, and yet to come. The original was illustrated by one of the most important illustrators of the era, John Leech. Same sort of generation as Tenniel, who illustrated Alice in Wonderland. So here is Marley's ghost frightening Scrooge with his clanking chains. And then Christmas Present is dominated really by the sort of idea that Christmas should be about giving, and it should be about food. So he's got a plum pudding and all sorts of things. And it's to sort of like this idea of conviviality and coming together. What I particularly want you to notice that Father Christmas here, not really Father Christmas yet, is in green. So the early tradition was to always have our Santa Claus figure in green, in evergreens. They of course represent the idea of rebirth. And then Christmas Future, we're looking at Scrooge's final resting place. Though in many ways it might have been more appropriate to have poor old Tiny Tim's final resting place, as of course Tiny Tim is Bob Cratchit's disabled little boy, who you see here being carried on the shoulders of his father and carrying his crutch. And of course Scrooge comes good at the end. And you can see here two different images showing the sort of denouement of the story. Frederick Barnard from the 1870s is the black and white one, and then Harold Coppings from 1924. And it's just to show you what a long tradition there is, you know, of reissuing A Christmas Carol with different illustrators. The most important thing was it was really all about Bob Cratchit and his family getting the food and the toys for Tiny Tim at the end of the story. Giving is more important than receiving. And so toys, I thought would move on very neatly to toys. So here we have the ladies' pictorial reporting on the new phenomena of the Christmas window. Christmas cards in almost every window, in the companionship of the attractions of the toy seller, the wares of the draper, the irresistible temptation of the milliner. Remember, at this era, 1880s, every lady wore a hat, and of their more legitimate comrades in the showcases of the stationer. From everywhere have these pretty little tokens of goodwill and kindly thoughts been peering out and seeking the attention of the passer-by. So here you see Peter Robinson in the background, and well known to many Londoners, obviously, and there's the window crammed with all sorts of toys. But most children dreamed of being taken to the Lowther Arcade, which was a toyland. It's no longer with us. It was near Charing Cross Station and was a very famous arcade that became very well known as a toy emporium. This wonderful image of it is by Walter Crane, who, like Randolph Caldecott, was a very important illustrator of children's toy books, as we call them. So department stores have been instrumental in creating many of our Christmas traditions. Gordon Selfridge, as you know, American by origin, was one of the men who came up with the idea of only X shopping days to Christmas. That wonderful sculpture on the front of Selfridge is on Oxford Street. It's by Gilbert Bayes and shows commerce on the prow of a ship. I've always thought that the clock above sort of ticking down to how many hours you've got left to do your shopping. Top image is Harrods. I've always thought that Harrods had the best windows. They, since the recession, you know, we haven't had windows as quite as spectacular as I would like. But this, of course, was the theme of the Polar Express. More of trains later. But many of our most, you know, vivid traditions come from American department stores. Macy's in particular in New York, love it. They debuted their Christmas windows in 1883. I think they might be standing over a hot air grill as well and keeping warm. As you know, New York in December is quite chilly. And the Christmas grotto, well, more of that in a minute in terms of its history, but the best one used to be in Harrods. And here it was in 2011. Here's some nostalgia for me. I used to take my children to it regularly. We would have a day in London. We would do all the windows and we would do at least, you know, one grotto, either Selfridges or Harrods. Because, of course, these are what department stores are important for, all the extras that they gave you rather than simply, you know, another brand on the high street. It was the department store experience. There was Whiteley's in Bayswater, the universal provider that even managed to procure for somebody an elephant for Christmas. I wouldn't recommend that now. So the first Christmas grotto is said to be in Liverpool and dates to 1879. This was created by David Lewis. I don't think he's any relation to John Lewis, but anybody wishes to correct me, they can do. So David Lewis went to Paris to visit Bon Marché, one of the most important department stores in Paris. There's Bon Marché and Galeries Lafayette. Bon Marché was more middle of the road. It was sort of middle class as opposed to haute bourgeois, as we like to put it. And so when he came back, he opened a store in Liverpool called Bon Marché. It means provider of all goods. And he was the first to stage a winter wonderland, as you can see. Here's an old advert for it. I'm afraid Lewis's in Liverpool is long gone. But the grotto was bought by an enterprising local entrepreneur and is now reconstructed in one of their shopping centres. I love the way it says on the logo, the world famous grotto, established 1879. Bon Marché isn't there anymore either, I'm afraid. It was destroyed, I think, by bombing in the Second World War. So Macy's, another obvious addition to the mythology of Christmas, is the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. It always ends with Santa Claus arriving in New York. And you're about to discover that Santa Claus was essentially invented by New York for a variety of reasons. The tradition of the Macy's Parade began in 1924. And here we have the sort of traditional image of Santa with his elves, sometimes with Mrs. Claus, who's dressed in green, but most importantly, those reindeer and the sleigh. And these are all very much 19th century additions, largely all down to St. Nicholas, but really in the way that St. Nicholas was disseminated. So we always think of St. Nicholas as being very much associated with Amsterdam and in the Netherlands. He's the patron saint of Amsterdam. And so therefore we tend to think of it all being about Santa Claus, as he's called there. But they're just as mad on St. Nicholas in France. It's a very big holiday in France, the 6th of December, or the first weekend of December. It's given over to celebrations of St. Nicholas. It's really big in Nancy. Looks like Nancy, pronounce it Nancy, which is the capital of Lorraine. So we're going right over to the east of France, Lorraine, Alsace, and then Germany. And the reason why it's so big in Nancy is they have a little bit, a relic of St. Nicholas in a local church, basilica. St. Nicholas du Port has a tiny fragment of St. Nicholas. And one of the things that you can see that's different about the parade, this is the centre square, this is the Place Stanislas in Nancy, full to the gunnels on, at the end of the parade. This is St. Nicholas du Pont. This is Port, the church just outside Nancy, where the relic is kept. But can you notice down the bottom that St. Nicholas arrives by ship, not by sleigh, but by ship, which may confuse many. But it's to do with the fact that St. Nicholas is actually a very ancient saint. By that I mean he's Roman period, okay? And originally he is associated with Myra, which is now in modern day Turkey. And the problem was that Turkey fell under the Ottoman Empire. So a load of Italians from Bari, that's in the foot of Italy, at Naples, decided to go and rescue the remains of St. Nicholas. This is a rather dodgy thing to do. They did it in the dead of night. They basically went in and stole St. Nicholas's body. And this was transported to the Italian city of Bari. So this is where the boat comes in. St. Nicholas had to travel by boat from what is now modern Turkey to the toe of Italy to Bari, and that was where the boat came in. It gets more complicated because once the relics arrived in Bari, they were then, I'm afraid he was broken up and bits were taken to Venice. And, in order to sort of spread the cult, if I can put it that way, relics of St. Nicholas were spread far and wide. And that, of course, is how we got a tiny relic of St. Nicholas in Nancy, and why this is a really important festival for the Nanciens. It's actually invested in the UNESCO list of important cultural events, alongside the famous Festival of Fire, which takes place in Valencia every March. So he's sometimes known as St. Nicholas of Myra, which was in Asia Minor, modern Turkey, and he's sometimes known as St. Nicholas of Bari, because that's where his remains still are to this day. And he has become very much associated with the Netherlands and Amsterdam, as he's their patron saint, where they know him as Santa Claus, as you can see here. And a lot of the traditions associated with him, again, appear to come with this link to the Netherlands, like the oranges. So this has two origin stories, if I can put it that way. One is that St. Nicholas gave gold balls as dowries to three daughters who were in need of them. And the other is, remember that the Netherlands were part of the Spanish Empire. They were the Spanish Netherlands. And oranges from Seville were a great luxury. So that may be another reason why oranges become so important initially in the 17th century. So this little girl here in this wonderful painting of the St. Nicholas Fest by Jan Steen has got a bucket, and you can see she's got her oranges. She's been a good girl, and she would have got her presents in the shoe that you see down the bottom, because that's how, that's where the stocking probably comes from. It's originally a shoe. But the little boy over there has been bad, so he's likely to suffer the switch or the birch. because all the time it was sort of emphasizing the moral was you would only get your gift if you were a good child and not a bad one. So my husband, who must have always been a good child, remembers getting an orange and a piece of coal. I'm not quite sure where the piece of coal comes from, but we definitely know where the oranges come from. They come from this long tradition. And I think for many, it was simply that an orange was a luxury, particularly during the Depression. So remembering that you've got your good girls and your bad girls, well, I'm afraid that if you happen to be a German child, you're likely to be terrified by Krampus or Klaubath, terrifying, devilish-like monster who would literally come and steal you away or thrash you with a birch or a switch. And this is him in a present-day parade in Germany. Terrifying. And then these are Christmas cards, just to remind you of the ordeal that you're going to suffer if you're not a good child. So here you're being abducted and chased by a devil with a birch or a switch. Here on the sleigh, he's making off with you. And I love the idea that come 1900, Krampus could arrive by car and abduct you that way. So initially then, Santa Claus was indefinitely a green. And of course, this goes back way before the Romans to the whole sort of pagan traditions of Christmas. After all, we celebrate it at the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. And the Romans had Saturnalia, and again, many days of feasting and drinking to get them through the longest days of the year. So the Christian faith is good at absorbing these pagan ideas, but it also gets rather nervous about them, as you will see when we look at some Christmas carols in a little while. So he was known as Old Father Christmas, Sir Christmas, Lord Christmas. He's always associated, as you can see, with evergreens, because again, it's this idea of renewal. End of the old year, beginning of the new. So the sort of things that you would again bring in, evergreens like fir trees, that the Christmas tree will come to later, but here at the garland, a garland at the end of a Victorian staircase. Mistletoe again goes back to Celtic beliefs and even earlier, and being kissed under the mistletoe, Druids and all of that. And then a rather lovely, again, iconic image of what is now the traditional Santa Claus, the jolly old elf with his red suit and holding up there a garland of holly and ivy, again, evergreen. But really, Santa Claus, let's be quite honest about that, as we know him today, as a chubby, plump and right jolly old elf, is essentially an American invention. There is no two ways about that in terms of his conception in the red suit with the big beards. And as you can see in here in a illustration for The Night Before Christmas. The book I'm showing you is 1896, but the poem by Clement Clark Moore is as early as 1823 and was inspired by Washington Irving, as you'll see in a minute. So it was essentially the night before Christmas that sort of gave us all of the things that we've come to know and love, the deer, the sleigh, the rooftops coming down the chimney, the parcels, etc. It's obviously essentially derived from St. Nicholas, because remember that New York is New Amsterdam. So just like the original Old Amsterdam, New York also took St. Nicholas, renowned for gift giving. That was his whole sort of like purpose as a saint. Renowned as gift giving, was taken as, in effect, the patron saint of New York as well. Now, I said that The Night Before Christmas is not the first. It has an interesting prequel, Ye Olde, as you can see, Santa Claus with Much Delight, as early as 1821, published in New York. At this stage, we're sort of embryonic. He can be in a green costume, or he can be in a red costume. He only has one stag, but he does indeed have a sleigh, and he's only going to give gifts to good children. So this was the first publication for reindeers, for Santa's reindeer and sleigh, and the first to describe his arrival on Christmas Eve. Now, this was largely, again, due to Protestant beliefs. They didn't like this idea of gift giving on Christmas Day, which should be a somber occasion and, you know, devout. So it was quite a good idea strategically to move it to the day before, to Christmas Eve, which is why, you know, and the same is true of many Catholic countries like Portugal. They really celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve, and they could be serious on Christmas Day. In 1909, Irving writes for the Knickerbocker's History of New York, his first description of good old St. Nick flying over the treetops in a sleigh pulled by one reindeer, smoking a pipe and laying his finger beside his nose like that, because of course he knows who are the good and the bad children. I know I'm fascinated by how he evolves, and he does evolve gradually into the Santa that you and I would now recognize, with the red suit and the big beard and chubby. The first person to illustrate The Night Before Christmas was the wonderfully named Felix Octavius Carl Darley. Now, he was the first to actually conceive our sort of visualization of Santa. So the reindeer have now arrived alongside their sleigh, and there are 8 of them, and they have names. Now, originally, their names were more German sounding, which is really what you'd expect, because one of the reasons why all these traditions develop in America is because of mass migration from 1848 onwards, with many of those who felt themselves persecuted for their faith moving to America. Particularly German Protestants, Lutherans, etc. So originally the 2 of the reindeer are called Donner. Well, Donner and Blitzen were originally Dunder and Blixen, which many people felt made them sound a bit too German. Anyway, the 2 illustrations that I'm showing you are by Felix Octavius Darley in black and white, but down the bottom in colour, a beautiful series of illustrations of The Night Before Christmas by Arthur Rackham, who is really an Art Nouveau illustrator. I love the angels over the sleeping children, of course mine are in that category, and the traditional image of Santa in his sleigh with his toys riding over the rooftops. And this one is just to remind you of all their names. This is 1890, so now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Dunder and Blitzen. Rudolph comes a lot later, but again, it's important that you realize that he's another American invention to do with the department store. Christmas and commercialization, it's nothing new. So he first appears in 1939 as a coloring book, written by Robert L. May for the shop Montgomery Ward, not a person, but a shop. May's brother-in-law penned the song, and of course it will be sung by Gene Autry, #1 Christmas hit of 1949, and still I think one that many children enjoy listening to. Of course, it also became a very well-known cartoon. So going back to The Night Before Christmas, I have to say this is one of my own family's big Christmas traditions. Even when my daughter was in her early 20s and she moved temporarily to France, her father would have to, not Zoom her, Skype her, with a rendering of The Night Before Christmas on Christmas Eve. So 'twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in the hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were all nestled snug in their beds. And so the illustrations that I've got here are from the 2 front covers are from the 1890s, and then hanging up the stockings is also from the 1890s. But down in the corner, dating to 1876, is the man who really created Santa Claus, the wonderful American illustrator Thomas Nast. More of him in a minute. I love the way that he's standing on the polar bear's head and nailing up his stocking. There's been much debate about the whole sort of origins of The Night Before Christmas. Was it written, by Clement Moore? Was there another author? And the argument was made more intense because it was published anonymously. As one of the arguments was that the author wanted to remain anonymous because he was a serious scholar, and he thought writing something as popular as The Night Before Christmas might damage his reputation. But anyway, I still think that it's by Clement Moore. So here we have, the absolute archetypal image of Santa Claus putting the presents in the children's stockings. And here's the end of the poem. And giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, and he drove out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. And that image of Santa on his sleigh definitely owes a lot to Thomas Nast, who I first started to study because he's very important for Oscar Wilde aficionados. When Wilde went to America in 1882, he created a lot of very unpleasant cartoons, parodies of Wilde and his lilies and his sunflowers. And he was generally known as Nasty. So that may be where, you know, the expression comes from. The important thing is Thomas Nast really invents Father Christmas. And he does so because America is locked into the Civil War in the early 1860s. So before we get to that, here we have Nast on his way to creating Santa, 1874. His suit will still be often brown and look rather like a bear's suit other than bright red. But there he is waiting to go down the chimney. I love the one where the children are looking for him on top of the chimney, seeing Santa Claus of 1876. A lot of these were published in Harper's, which is one of the leading American magazines. And so here he is coming down the chimney with the stockings. I thought it was a particularly beautifully decorated fireplace. But here he is in the Thomas Nast cartoon, upsetting the cats and the dogs as he comes down the fireplace, now in his more distinctive, you know, rotund form and wearing a sort of almost red suit. Now, I particularly wanted to show you this by Nast. So as you can see here, it's a Christmas celebration from 1863. It shows, this is where Santa is really created. We're in the Civil War. So Santa is bringing presents on this side and the children are opening them in the morning. But most importantly, what the children really want is their father to come home from the front. And I wanted to show it to you because can you see a word now that we've all become very familiar with, but we may never have heard before 2020, furloughed. It's an American expression. It was when you could officially leave the front line and go home and you were being paid, hence the word furlough. The first, however, conception of this, you know, idea of Santa Claus as a sort of beacon of light in the depths of depression, Civil War, is something I think we can learn from today. So this was actually the first time that Nast, you know, put this idea together. It was actually published in January 1863, shows the mother praying for her husband at the front, and our soldier at the front is looking at photographs of his family back home, and we have the Confederate and, you know, Unionists, you know, in the flags, and, you know, the whole battle scenes and naval battles down the bottom. So yeah, it's very emotive image that Nast creates. And then having created this during the Civil War, he takes up this idea of developing a whole sort of mythology around Santa. So he comes up with the fact that Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. That was chosen because of the Aurora Borealis. It already seemed a magic place. So by 1866 in Harper's, we've got Santa Claus and his works, and at North Pole, you know, magnetic north, it all comes together. He's got his workshops, he's looking out for good and bad children, he's got an account book of good and bad behavior. I love that holiday week. Here he is, you know, at Dolly's tea party. There he is with his stags, and all these little vignettes. I love that, making Dolly's clothes. And so even now in the 60s, he still looks brown rather than red, and he's in a very clearly sort of hairy suit, a bear skin. And here he is making toys in his workshop. The elves will come along a little later in terms of American mythology. And so here's a lovely montage of children dreaming of the toys that they're going to get. And here in this one by Thomas Nast, they're looking for where Santa Claus is, where are his workshops at the North Pole. In this one, the letters were often sent by the parents. So it wasn't children that wrote letters to Father Christmas, it was parents who wrote letters to Father Christmas saying whether their child had been good or bad. And in this one, the letter is saying he's been bad, and Santa's rebuke to the child brings the response, "I'll never do it again." So here are all the letters, and here are the naughty children and the good children. And I love this one idea that by the 1880s, the letters have gone. We're America, remember? And so you phoned up instead. You phoned up Santa to ask what gift you would like at Christmas. I do like that idea. And so here in 1881, that's the one on the right-hand side, we have our classic Santa, a jolly old elf with his pipe and his beard and his toys. And in the 1881 Nast image, as you can see, most importantly, he's looking out with his telescope for the good and the bad children. I think above all, it's Nast's conception that then feeds into the wonderful Santa Claus created. Yes, you've guessed it, from the byline Coca-Cola. Think of that advert, the holidays are coming. Hayden Sudblom is the most famous graphic artist who worked for Coca-Cola. And the concept of the elves comes along in the mid-1850s thanks to Louisa May Alcott. She was the one who introduced Santa's helpers. He has got a lot of toys to make, hasn't he, at the North Pole. In this original artwork for a Coca-Cola advert from 1935, Santa is very conveniently, for me, sitting next to a Christmas tree. And the Christmas tree has always been said to be associated or even invented by Prince Albert, but that really, again, is another urban myth. So this is Queen Victoria's Christmas tree in 1857. And as you can see, it's covered with candles. So I've always winced when I've seen it to think, how did Windsor or Buckingham Palace survive for so long with all those candles? These are all her presents, nobody else's presents. They're all Queen Victoria's. And at this stage, you can see they're not wrapped up because nobody's invented wrapping paper yet. I wish they hadn't come up with that idea. That doesn't come around until the 1880s. So it's this whole idea again that the royal family, presents of this, well, the royal family, a perfect entity. 9 children in the end. However, here you're only seeing, there were 4 boys and 5 girls, but here you're just seeing the first 5. Edward is the little boy here dressed in sort of like Russian costume. And Alfred is the other son wearing a dress, because remember that at this stage boys are dressed as girls, they're not breeched till about the age of 5 to 7, depending on the family. But Albert wanted to present this image of the perfect Victorian family. And the Christmas tree obviously becomes central to that sort of unity of family life. So this is the Queen's Christmas tree painted by Joseph Nash at Windsor Castle. This one's 1845. She appears to have had a large gilded stag given to her on this occasion. And this is William Coden at the Queen's Christmas tree of 1851. Now they are all just her presents, okay? Nobody else's, because everybody had their own tree. Well, I quite like that idea. So this is the Duchess of Kent's Christmas tree up here. And this is the children's Christmas tree. And again, these are depicted at Windsor in 1850. Sheet music, because of course, what did you do but get round the Christmas tree but sing? But they're also very good representations for the era. And one year at Windsor, they reconstructed one of the displays of Christmas trees. Quite a nice idea, this, hanging it from your ceiling. They're now electric. The electric lights, electric candles don't come along until Edison, not until the end of the century. So these would have all been candles. And there are a lot of them, aren't there? Rather alarmingly. You might be able to see a modern reproduction in the background. You might be thinking to yourself, they don't really look like modern Christmas trees at all. And the reason for that is that Albert's Christmas tree is likely to be an artificial one. Before we get on to that, so here we have a recent version of a Victorian Christmas. This, of course, is Victoria, described as Downton with crowns, I rather like. And this is Christmas with Albert, Victoria and the Duchess of Kent in 1848 in the Illustrated London News, with one of these very distinctive Christmas trees, lots of candles, and most importantly, lots of baubles. And then the toys, not wrapped, but just around the base of the tree. But look at the vignettes around the outside. Lots of game birds, vast quantities eaten at Christmas. But then the little vignettes are all about giving alms to the poor. Again, emphasizing that Christmas was as much about giving as it was getting. So these are two reconstructions of Victorian Christmas trees, and they are artificial. The artificial Christmas tree comes from Germany, where it was often illegal to cut down a tree for all sorts of environmental reasons. So artificial Christmas trees were made from about 1850 onwards. They were usually made out of goose feathers, which were dyed green. Again, I'm just raising my eyebrows at the thought of the fire hazard. One here has been reconstructed with lots of candles, just to put that point over. And then there was often a village or a nativity scene around the base of the tree. You can see that on this side of the nativity tree. And when I used to go to Winter Tour, which is this big American museum at Wilmington, Delaware, it's the DuPont family residence, all the rooms were beautifully decorated. So this is the sort of way in which, again, they were able to maximize the traditions of an American Christmas. Oh, I like that idea. So trawling as one does through the internet, looking for interesting and bringing things up to date. I like to make my lectures relevant, you know, have a finger on the pulse. And so I found this wonderful thing about an underwhelming Christmas tree from Sheffield, which has been put up this year in its 100th year. It was bought in 1920 to 2020. It's an artificial tree of the Victorian variety. And I just thought that was charming that it had survived for so long. And from the 1920s, this contemporary illustration of a little girl coming home from school. And the Christmas tree, again, really more bauble than tree, isn't it? With all the little elves around the bottom. So the Christmas tree is essentially a German tradition. So Albert didn't bring it here. Probably Queen Charlotte did, the consort of George III. So it may be even earlier. It may go right the way back to when the Hanoverian dynasty first were ensconced under George I. It's essentially a German idea, you know, bringing the evergreen into the house. And it was very much associated with Protestant rather than Catholic traditions. So rather Puritan. It just originally food, so luxuries like those oranges and nuts, and you would put candy canes and gingerbreads. And you can see here a fictitious 16th century German Christmas. And then in America, where all of this gets amplified, they go to town with this idea of building a village around the bottom of the tree. It comes again from a Protestant subsection, the Moravian Church, and it actually has a proper name, Putz. So it sounds a rather derogatory term to me, but it's this idea of building a big Christmas village around the tree with a train track, where the Polar Express, of course, comes in. And if you pop into a big garden centre, even these have now infiltrated us. So if you want to go after this and build your own Christmas village, you can do so. But I do hope you've got plenty of room on your Barclay card, as it's not a cheap undertaking. In America, they build them and then they're usually open for charity events, or, you know, kids go in and get some sweets. So it's done in a very, again, you know, act of largesse in America, normally, probably not so much this year. It's not long before we move on from, you know, candy canes and edibles. One of the things they really like was gilded walnuts. So you can do that very easily at home if you fancy it. But it's not long before we're into the fully flown glass bauble. So here, a lovely sort of chain with an elf in the middle. And then all these beautiful baubles are genuine, they're Victorian. I'm showing you how densely they were packed on the tree. So more bauble than tree. It's an artificial tree, obviously. Lots of tinsel. And all these baubles come from the Puppenhauser Museum in Basel, or Basel as we now have to call it. And this is essentially a doll's house museum, but it has a whole section devoted to Christmas. You can see how ephemeral they are, and rather naive. They look rather homemade, don't they? But with lots of tinsel, almost like Christmas cards cut up down the bottom here, where they're out sleighing. But these are all genuine, late 19th century baubles, rather nice. These are more recent, but I couldn't resist them because, of course, we've got all the characters from A Christmas Carol, plus a traditional Santa. And then remembering that there's a lot of Saturnalia still going on at Christmas time. The original Roman celebrations, the Saturnalia was topsy-turvy. So, you know, the wealthy had to swap places with the poor and vice versa. And so the Harlequin, again, this idea of the Joker in the pack, again, was a popular theme at Christmas, also amplified through the pantomime, which we'll get to in just a minute. So here we are around the Christmas tree. So originally the presents were either under the tree or hanging from the tree. And then wrapping paper comes along in the 1880s. And so now presents are placed under the tree, and we have the surprise element. This is a photograph from 1892, as you can see, and purports to actually have electric lights, candles, which come in 1882, very shortly after Edison invents the incandescent light bulb. So Winterthur has a beautiful tree in every room. And it's always amused me that in America, the lights stay up for a lot longer than they do here. Usually we take them down, don't we, on 12th night, the 5th of January. But in America, they keep them up well into, you know, almost into February. And that's because they've got an excuse. 2nd of February, the feast of the presentation of Jesus in the temple, Candlemas. Technically, you can keep them up till then. Therefore, I love this Winterthur tree, which is covered in snow, but it's got daffodils down the bottom. So you might want to keep them up till spring. And then obviously the most famous Christmas tree in London is the one in Trafalgar Square, an annual gift, of course, from Norway. And remembering that you can take them down, well, you normally take them down here on 12th night, the 12 days of Christmas, the 12 celebratory days, back to the Saturnalia. Now the song is supposed to be a way for you to learn your catechism. So you'll notice that there are lots of birds in it. So I've got a nice little vignette down the bottom of lots of dead game, partridges, turtle doves. And I won't go through them all because this will go onto my YouTube site. And you can see that essentially you were to learn that 2 turtle doves was the Old and New Testament, 3 French hens was faith, hope and charity, and so it goes on and so it goes on. And a partridge in a pear tree is Jesus Christ, number 1, if I can put it that way. So it was essentially a way to learn your catechism. And it was, again, a big celebration was, you know, at the end of Christmas was sort of completed by, you know, 12th night, which marked the Epiphany or the arrival of the Magi, the 3 wise men into Bethlehem. We had games and parties and cake. A forerunner of the Christmas cake was actually initially consumed on 12th night. And this is where your Saturnalia thing came in again, role reversing and swapping. So traditionally it should have a dried bean, which is, if it's acquired by a man, will elect him as king for a night, and queen if you have a pea, so a little green pea. And you have to swap over. So whoever gets the bean or the pea, they roll reverse. And in the cake, I'm hoping you're noticing the orange, which again is sort of, you know, the orange in the bottom of the stocking, the luxury gift, but also again relates to St. Nicholas and his largesse. So Christmas cake was a nice link through to food, because obviously that's a major element at Christmas, both in the Victorian era and now. Though I think you probably would have found a menu in the French menus that they like rather heavy going, very meat heavy. I tried to find one for Christmas Day. The closest I could get was the 17th of January, 1899, but you can see that there's a lot of fish. and a lot of courses, and that's just the buffet. But the table probably would have been laid either, well, probably at Windsor, that's Osborne in the vignette, with the magnificent Minton table service that Queen Victoria was gifted at the Great Exhibition in 1851. It's absolutely fabulous. A version of it was made and given to the Viennese court. So you might have seen it in the Treasury in Vienna. It's a different service, but it's the same pattern. And it's absolutely magnificent. A fitting setting for the food. So Christmas 1860, a visitor to Windsor saw a mighty sight of 50 turkeys, a huge baron, that's half the side of beef, and a woodcock pie of 100 birds. So when I say they got through a lot of game, they certainly did. Enter Mrs. Beeton, who died sadly and surprisingly young, though, you know, she did a lot in a very short time, including producing quite a few children. And Mrs. Beeton's book of household management is still very much with us. And these are very much a Victorian phenomenon, because girls could not rely anymore on their mothers teaching them. You know, they were back in the countryside, the girls were now in the city. So we're back to the sort of Mrs. Bridges scenario. Please do note the early sort of double level cooker here, which I think is likely to be gas, though there were electric cookers already. If you've ever been to Derngate, the Mackintosh house in Northampton, you'll have seen one there. So game, partridges, more partridges, Surrey fowls, poor Surrey fowls, guinea fowl, plovers, stuffed capon a la mayonnaise, roast gosling. I mean, many people wouldn't have had a turkey. They would have had beef, or they would have had a goose, which was, you know, working class fare, if I can put it that way. So there's a Christmas dinner in 1850. I don't know, I fancy boiled turkey, but I think you get the impression there's a lot going on there in terms of meat. And then salsify was again a sort of green, I think it was a root vegetable, but again it was, you know, associated with the bottom end of the social spectrum. So turkeys, again, I'm sorry, back to America. They are American. Here's a beautiful plate, meat plate with the turkey in the centre. Of course, they pop up on Christmas cards. I do feel sorry for them at Christmas. Beef, goose and turkey in that order, if I can put it that way. And then here we have Sainsbury's. Yeah, my choice. Well, I'm a very great supporter of Sainsbury's. And then wishing you a Merry Christmas, but I want you to note that he's carrying it out to what appears to be a doorway. It's steaming, and they are up here because most people didn't have an oven big enough to take the turkey or the goose or the jointed beef. They took it to their local baker and they did it in their big bread oven, and then you all went to collect it to have Christmas dinners. So as you can see, they're all coming out with their joints of meat. Mrs. Bridges again, well, Downton Abbey style, but on the theme of mince pies. I don't know you, but I'm not that keen on them anymore. I think it's because they're just too stodgy. But they are supposed to come via the Crusaders, and the Middle East recipe is supposed to be meats, fruits and spices, eaten in token of the Eastern origin of the three wise men, the Magi. There's supposed to be 13 ingredients, one for the 12 apostles and the extra one for Christ. And the traditional mince pie should have suet in it, which clearly is not for the vegetarians amongst us. And our young lad here, borrowed from Wikipedia, as you can see, is about to tuck into his Christmas pie. Then Christmas pud. Well, again, I'm still not that sure I like it. It's very stodgy after that big meal. The Victorians preferred to boil it. She's boiling it in a washer up here. She probably would have done her laundry in that, as well as boil her pudding. So it was always in a cloth, a linen cloth, and round in shape. And it's supposed to have in it a threepenny piece or a sixpence for wealth, a wishbone for good luck, a silver thimble for thrift, and an anchor for faith, hope and charity, so safe harbour. These are all long-standing traditions, but if, like me, you're not so keen on Christmas pudding, here's Mrs. Beeton giving you a lot of alternatives. Jellies, Oh yeah, custards, ices. And Mrs. Beaton would also give you lots of ideas of how to decorate your table. So supper table at the top. I love the concept of a modern ball buffet to keep you going whilst dancing. What characterises the top table, dinner à la Russe, are the very elaborate floral arrangements. The most elaborate table I have ever seen is the one at Winterthur, which is decorated with palm trees. Took me a while to get the message. Of course, it's Palm Sunday, so beginning of the story, end of the story. And then if you've got the time and the knowledge, napkins, works of art in their own right. They have their own names. Double fan is down the bottom. You can actually see that laid out on the table. And these are all, you know, the top one is here, one of the sheets from Mrs. Beaton. And you see that matches. It's very elaborate, double fold. Yes, you need to have plenty of patience. And on the table, you can see it's laid out also with place cards, little frames that put in the name of the person. Again, these are still traditions that we have with us today when the table is set for a grand occasion. However, I think this is taking napkin folding a little too far. This is Wadston Manor in 2013, where we have the Catalan artist Juan Salas folding napkins, allegedly, to Renaissance and Baroque patterns. Yes, well, again, it's very impressive, but I think origami might be easier. That's evidently where his skills come from. He began as a paper folder before moving into napkins. So what would you also find on that table? Undoubtedly crackers. So Cossacks is what they were originally called, and they were just little twists of paper with a sweet inside, often a sugared almond. And they were invented by Thomas J. Smith in 1847, really to sell his sweets. And then it was his son, Walter, who really got into the swing and added mottos and hats. And a cracker was eventually added. I love the way you could have English confections, French or American confections. They were obviously different things inside. And I just wish now that that's what we had in crackers. I don't know about you, but all those toys are irritating. You can't do anything with them. Wouldn't it be much nicer if we had, you know, a decent sweet inside our crackers? So this is showing you the extremes of Victorian society. So A Christmas Doll by Joseph Clark. Remember, it's going back to that medieval idea of handing out gifts. So it might be that the Christmas pudding has been a gift, but it's being brought in by a very happy mother to be distributed to the children who are looking really excited. But on the other side, Christmas Eve dinner in a private dining room of a great restaurant looks much saucier, doesn't it? I have a feeling they are not the men's wives. I think we could definitely say they are out enjoying a night on the town. And next to the image by Ludovico Marchetti, I've given you some exemplary high Victorian fashion dresses with those incredible waists and ruffs and flowers everywhere. Yeah, they're obviously top end of the fashion spectrum. And this one I love by Jules Grun. Again, looking at it, I'm thinking, interesting mix here of lots of young girls and quite elderly men. It's simply entitled After the Dinner. But I particularly liked it because, of course, it's à la Russe. It's showing you one of these very elaborate floral table decorations. So after that big dinner, how are you going to wear it off? Or, you know, what exercise? Well, what exercise? Blind Man's Buff, that was a very popular game. All sorts of Christmas games like charades and card games, which we've got down the bottom. Snap, remember things like that? Those days of innocence. But you're more likely to gather around the piano and have a good old sing-song. This is by Walter Dendley Sadler, and he's taken us back in time. He's a late Victorian artist, but he's set this, I think, somewhere around about 1820. You know, not quite Jane Austen, but just after. Again, so there's nostalgia for a past that hasn't yet really been affected by industrialization. And it's simply entitled Home Sweet Home. And that's, of course, what the children are allegedly singing. I love it. And so that introduces Christmas carols. And the Protestants didn't really like them. They thought that some were too pagan, others were too Catholic. They were originally, not really approved of until the famous Bishop Benson of Truro down in Cornwall introduced the famous 9 lessons and carol service, which I very much associate with midnight mass. So here are our most famous carols. They're mostly Victorian, as you can see. Jingle Bells, sorry, is American. O Little Town of Bethlehem, sorry, is American, as in Away in a Manger. And Ding Dong Merrily on High is as late as 1924. I'm giving you the sort of traditional bells are ringing, it's Christmas morning, and here is the choir singing. But I'm also showing you the sort of itinerant carolers on the other side. And I love the way the guy in the window above looks like he's about to pour something a little bit more than water on their heads. I'll let you use your imagination. But this again goes back to a long tradition of singing literally for your supper, the wassailing. So the carol singers here by Gunning King clearly are in need of dole. They are literally singing for their supper. It could be money, it could be food. And, the carol singers by William M. Spittle at the top is the more traditional idea of the estate workers coming up to the big house to be handed the wassail bowl, which you can see in the bottom image. There's the wassail bowl being handed by the lord of the manor, and wassail was like a fortified drink. You would also feed it to apple trees, you'll be pleased to know, to ensure their fruitfulness the following spring. So we know that Christmas carols go back to the 15th century, and as I say, very much associated with this whole idea of the wassailer who goes from house to house looking for a handout of some description, either food or money. I like In the Bleak Midwinter, that's my favourite carol. The lyrics are, of course, Christina Rossetti, sister of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, not set to music until 1909. A lovely portrait of her by Rossetti, and also her in the guise of the Virgin Mary in the Annunciation, famous painting by her brother. For the more ambitious amongst us, we might go hunting. We're back to Mr. Carleon's Christmas. This, of course, is Randolph Caldecott. So, the ladies might sit around and sing, play cards, and the piano is all important. The men on Boxing Day might well go hunting. But Boxing Day was really about gift giving. It's the feast of St. Stephen's, and Charles Dickens describes it on which postmen, errand boys, and servants of various kinds received a Christmas box or contributions from those whom they serve. So again, mostly food, but perhaps clothing. So the little girl is giving the poor boy an apple. This is a horrible Victorian lady who is not giving the crossing sweep a few pence for his services. His job was to sweep all the muck out of the way so that her dress doesn't get dirty. And although he's doffing an imaginary cap, she's not giving him any money at all. Whereas in this image, of course, the decent chap is dropping a few pennies into the hat here of this lad who's working with the crossing sweeper. And down the bottom here, literally, box, it's a pun on box office, box offices, where all the boxes are being sent out. And it all goes back essentially to this idea of the Lord of the Manor handing out some sort of dole at Christmas. So Good King Wenceslas fits the bill nicely at this point, as of course that was what he did. He went out in the snow on the Feast of Stephen to take alms to the poor. So coming to the end of my talk, I want to sort of end with pantomimes and then a little bit about life below stairs because of this concept of transformation. So here is Cinderella, first performed in 1870, the transformation of the poor girl who becomes a princess. I love the poster, which is by John Hassel. And here we have Cinder's and then her transformation. And the pantomime was one of the big inventions of the Victorian era. Drury Lane became famous for them. This, the whole idea of cross-dressing, sort of Saturnalia thing comes back again, doesn't it? With the principal boy and the pantomime dame. So we've got Jack of the Beanstalk, Whimsical Walker, I love him, and Aladdin. Most expensive pantomime of all was Robinson Crusoe of 1881, with a huge cast, as you can see, a total staff of somewhere between 700 and 800 people to cope with all the elaborate mechanisms. You know, there were all sorts of flying trapezes and, you know, elements of the stage that went up and down. People had very high expectations in terms of the splendor and spectacle of the pantomime. So here's Vesta Tilly as the principal boy, who's always, you know, a girl, and Dan Leno as Widow Twankin. I was very lucky to see, you know, when I was young, I went to the Palladium for my pantomime experience of Arthur Askey was always the Dame. So that all sort of comes together right at the end here with the servants' New Year's ball. And you might recall that in Downton Abbey, this is a big feature where the servants come up and dance, you know, the staff, and dance with the lords of the manor. So the Saturnalia element. This is a delightful image from a book called Treasure on Earth, capturing at Lyme Park, you know, the servants' ball, when you get this crossover between upstairs and downstairs. And I have to say, looking at photographs of Victorian servants, they all look a little bleak, don't they? Here's the staff at Tinsfield, a wonderful house just outside Bristol. Or Erddig, where the archive for the servants is very rich. So how they looked in 1912, I thought it was lovely to have the footmen, you know, in there. What they look like they're about to go hunting, don't they? But they're the footmen. And then this poor girl here peeling potatoes. She looks like she's polishing something. And then over here, again, there's a motley group from Erddig in 1522. There's the footman at the end. And so it was for them, for the servants, Christmas was very tough. There's a lot of cooking, a lot of cleaning, just generally hard work. So Frederick Hardy's After the Party is the poor servants exhausted. On the other hand, the Fred Elwell one, which is as late as 1922, is showing the servants having their own party. All those hooks would have been for where all of the fowl, the birds, had been hanging. So some close-ups. So he's about to carve something, beef, turkey, or a goose. And I love this image at the back here where the cook, who thoroughly deserves it, looks like she's having a glass of stout poured for her. So I hope you've enjoyed this rapid overview of a Victorian Christmas. I'm sure there are many things I've left out and traditions I have not covered, but I was confining myself very much to what we think of as a Victorian Christmas. So I'm leaving you with the cast of Downton Abbey, and on the other side, the cast of Upstairs, Downstairs with Jean Marsh. Remember, she originated it as the housemaid, Mrs. Bridges, and that, again, rather thin tree in the background. But if you really want an American Christmas, or if you really want a Christmas with knobs on, there is only one person who will do it for you, and his name is Mickey Mouse. So if you really want the ultimate Christmas, Disney is the one who will provide it. And when my kids were little, we would always go to Disney in the week leading up to Christmas, what we used to call our Fakemas, because it wasn't actually yet the date, but just before. And we would give ourselves over to a Disney-fied Christmas. It was a great deal of fun. So I hope that you too have found this fun, and I leave you with my last slide to wish you a Merry Christmas. Remember that many of the traditions come from that Civil War period, and Thomas Nast and his how he devised Santa Claus as we've come to know and love him. So in many ways, in what is going to be a difficult and challenging and very unusual Christmas, remember that Santa was originally invented to get us through hard times. At least we're not experiencing a civil war. At least I hope we're not. But hopefully you will still enjoy Christmas, even though it will be a very different one. And I'm hoping Santa will still bring you plenty of cheer. Thank you very much.